So everybody, I'm PCO, owner of Sonic Fan Games HQ and the Sonic Amateur Games Expo. I'm here live. We got Neil Hazard. His mic is muted, but he's playing the game for the stream, so you can thank him for the visuals. We got Static as well, moderator SFGHQ. He's going to be helping out a little bit with the stream. And, of course, our main guest for the night, Tpot, developer of Teabat.
Hello.
Introduce yourself, Tpot.
Hello.
There he is. So, everyone that's watching us in Discord right now knows who you are, but some of the people who might be watching the VOD, they might not be entirely familiar with who you are. So, who are you, Tpot? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a programmer and artist that has been making Sonic fan games for a really long time, and has decided to start making original games. And
Nice.
Here we are with the first one.
So, how did you get into games, making games, coding, and so on?
I was just like, even when I was like really young, I was always fascinated with, how games were made. I think it's the same with like a lot of people who grew up to be animators or artists. May have saw animated cartoons or whatever, and would always think like, I want to do that. And so that kind of rings true for me, where like just playing games always made me feel like I want to make my own. I have all my own ideas and stuff like that, and so I try to get into that as quickly as possible.
So, we all know some of the projects you've been involved in the past, but people watching the VOD might not. What have you done before Teabat that you cut your teeth on, so to speak?
I'm trying to think. I mean, as for Sonic fan games, I did programming for Sonic Utopia. I helped out with the Sonic Chaos remake. But in terms of like my own projects, not a whole lot recently. Mostly just a lot of like demos and engines and stuff like that. Sonic Max engine. And a lot of unreleased projects.
So Sonic Max is actually rather prominent, though you're not apparently a fan of it yourself.
I get that a lot, because originally when I released it, I was kind of upset with it. I felt like it was just too difficult to use, and it would have required a lot of like rewriting. For it to be kind of up to my standard, I guess. And at first, nobody really was using it. And so I kind of just thought it was like a failed project, I guess. And so originally, I was very disappointed with it, and then became kind of an in-joke that, I felt that the engine was a mistake, but it was mostly just a joke that people, thought I was serious with, because my humor is maybe a little too dry.
So how do you feel about the fact that there's now a shitload of people who totally use Sonic Max and rave about it?
I'm very glad. I'm very glad that it's finally getting some use, and because I was really worried that people would have trouble learning it or getting used to it, and so I'm really happy that it people are getting some good use out of it.
Rock on. So now moving into Teabat itself, what inspired Teabat? I mean, like, how did you come up with this? Why make this game?
Now, are we talking about the character or the game?
The game.
Okay, the game. It's interesting because it was kind of by accident. I just wanted to see how well I could handle like the Game Boy style pixel art, and so I just kind of made a mock-up, and I just ended up using Teabat because I didn't really know what other character to use, and somebody just said, you should make a game out of this. And so I immediately kind of, started planning it out, and doing some tests in Game Maker, and a lot of everything you're seeing was all kind of planned out all at once. Like all of the levels from beginning to end, all of the bosses, aesthetics, cutscenes, and stuff. Almost everything was kind of planned out first, and then where was I? And I don't know. A lot of it just kind of came from like tea-related references and puns and stuff like that. I needed an excuse to have a boss named after Earl Grey, stuff like that. But I also take a lot of inspiration from almost like my frustrations with a lot of video games, I suppose. Like how Sonic 3, between each act, there'd be like a seamless transition, instead of fading out. And I always wish that a game would do that, but completely seamless, without a tally or a loading screen or something. Just the entire game is one huge map, from beginning to end. And I haven't seen that a whole lot, and so I really wanted to try to make that work.
All right. Why the super unique art style, though? It looks really cool, but it's very different. You don't really see that a lot and stuff these days. What made you go with that unique art style? What gave you that idea? How'd that come about?
Some of it's just kind of my style, because I really like getting a lot of detail out of a small resolution, or a very few colors. And of course, I really like making good use of colors in general, as you can probably tell. And because I've got a lot of comments about the heads-up display, kind of the huge border around it, and that's mostly inspired by arcade borders. I always liked how arcade games would have kind of all the information around the game display, and there was some examples like Dragon's Lair where the like score and time and stuff like that was also around the game. That was kind of part of the arcade border. But also a lot of old PC games kind of did the same thing. Even Doom and Wolfenstein, the game resolution would generally be a small window, and the heads-up display would be like separate. And so I just kind of always liked that style and aesthetic. And that's where the very unique heads-up display came from. It's also loosely inspired by the quotes from the Japanese Sonic box art. Just the way that it has kind of weird out of context text, kind of lying about. Yeah, I guess it's just mainly, a lot of it's just kind of my style, I guess. I really like colors.
Was there like a specific thing you were trying to impress upon the player with the particular color changes you have in the game? Like, is the purple supposed to represent a specific ambiance of that particular area, or is it just to differentiate the different zones in the game?
They're generally thematic. Like, I wanted Minty Meadow to be kind of, to feel a little bit more whimsical, I guess. And then the first area is very, not quite as laid back, I guess. And so usually the palettes are just determined in what I feel like kind of sets the mood, I suppose, because all of the palettes were actually done first. And so I just kind of looked through all the palettes that I've already added or created and just try to figure out what ones kind of fit most.
All right. So speaking of which, you have this collectathon style gameplay and all these little neat little gameplay features in the game. How did you come up with that particular style of gameplay? Why'd you choose that? Why do it that way?
Because I haven't seen a lot of games. I haven't seen a lot of like 2D collectathons, I guess. At least that I played. Because collectathons seem like something that grew out of the 3D era. With Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie. It really came out of 3D games. And besides Metroidvanias, which I haven't played a lot of actually, I've always wanted to see how that could be executed in 2D. And because I haven't at least tried or seen a game really do that, I wanted to try to take a shot at it. Because I do like collectathons. I do like the style of gameplay. I would love to see it in 2D.
All right, pretty neat. So you got this really cool pixel art style in the game. How do those assets get created? Walk us a little bit through the process of where those graphics come from. Like, are you just making them yourself? Do you have team members that do a lot of that?
No, pretty much most of the art is done by me until, at least everything up until Castle Grey. Because I have a much harder time with like bigger sprites, like really large scale like backgrounds and stuff like that. And so I got help from Spectra SO2 to handle a lot of the large scale background art. You'll see later in Neo's playthrough, there's like fountains and columns and all sorts of like large objects, and that was actually a lot of fun to do, because she would do all the art, like full scale digital art, and then I would convert them down into pixel art, and then shade them and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a collaborative effort, and I think they turned out really nice. But as for everything before that, everything you're seeing in Minty Meadow and Kimon Forest, that was all done by me. And it's an interesting process because, the first thing, every single sprite or tile is 16 by 16 pixels. So that's generally just what I start with. But all of the sprites and tiles are getting like polished up constantly. Like even just slight tweaks here and there. If you look at some of the like really early footage of the game, every single tile looks almost completely different, because it's just like in between each build and just constantly refining and updating each of the sprites and tiles. So it's not like a sprite or a tile is done once and then that's it. I usually do a rough and then slowly kind of polish things up as I get closer to the end of development, and as I get better as an artist.
All right, that makes sense. What about the music? Basically, same question. Where does that come from? Because you got some excellent sound design, some excellent jams in the game. How'd that come about? Who's making that awesome music?
That is all Lang's doing. He did an absolutely incredible job with the sound design and music. And I don't know anyone else who could have done as good as he did. And I mean, that's all him.
Playing the fucking music factory. God damn.
All the sound effects, music, everything, audio was done by Lang.
Absolutely fantastic. So one of the things I really like about the game is you have these weird little effects, like when you hit a boss and like the words you're probably like wham or hit. What did you come up with that, and how did you go about implementing this into the game? Like, how did you figure out how you wanted to do that and everything?
Okay, that's a really good question, actually. As for the boss, the first thing is, like, I really wanted to make it feel good to hit the boss. And I wanted to find a way to like complement the player for doing so. And I thought about that for a while, and I actually got inspiration from Into the Spider-Verse. There's one scene in particular right near the beginning where Miles is just discovering his spider powers, and it's hard to explain if you haven't seen the movie, but he's essentially in front of this like big like television screen background, and everything's super dark, and then there's just this huge like fancy text in the background full of colors that says "Watch out," and that's what kind of inspired the boss intro. And then I kind of used the same style of effect for the the boss hits, because I just really wanted it to like feel exciting just to get a hit, and make the player feel good about it. It's like it's cheering you on.
It really is. Adds a nice ambiance to the whole thing. How'd you come up with these bosses? Is there a thematic consistency for all the bosses in the game that you got planned? Is there some sort of theme behind them? And what the hell are these things anyway?
Yeah, all of the bosses were kind of built from like the story, and so I can't say a whole lot without spoiling some of the later game stuff, but all of the bosses, actually, I should say most. Most of the bosses are part of a family of ghosts that are kind of the main antagonists, and then there's two bosses that are only slightly related, but I can't say how. And it's even hard to explain, because the first boss that was planned out was, again, literally just for the sake of making an Earl Grey pun. And everything was just kind of built from that. But some of the bosses were also like, I just wanted to make something interesting. I wanted to find a way to make each boss memorable. And you don't really see that with Rufus yet, but he'll be back. As we might notice, he runs off at the end of the first fight. So you'll see more of him later. Not in this demo, but in the next one.
So, speaking of the story, what can you tell us about the story, or at least elaborate on so far?
So Teabat is essentially a guardian of I'm trying to like bring this up in my head. A magical forest that naturally produces tea, and a family of ghosts that really, really love tea. They're very British inspired. Have run out of tea, and so they go to that nearby forest and kind of take it all while he's sleeping, and so he has to go get his tea back. That's about as much as I can give out, I think. I'm trying to think. Yes, that's all I can give for now. There's a lot more to that, but it kind of reveals itself a little bit more kind of later into the game.
All right, so you said he's the guardian of the forest, but what is Teabat? Is he just a bat? Is he a magical bat? What is he?
He's basically just a bat. But how to explain that? I'll just go with he's basically just a bat for now. Because it's a little bit harder to explain. It might be a little bit spoilery.
All right. So could you give us a sense of Teabat's power level, so to speak? Could he beat up Mario or Luigi?
No, not a chance. Though he is technically invincible. You might notice that if you lose energy, he just gets really tired. And that's why it takes 10T, because he's just getting his energy back through caffeine. But no, I don't think he could. He's, at least from the beginning of the game, he's a bit lazy, and, you know, he can bop ghosts on the head. That's about it.
So, could he kick Tails' ass?
Does Tails get to use, like, gadgets and things?
No.
No? I don't think so.
You still don't think he can kick his ass?
Maybe? I don't know, I don't think so, though.
What about force his Tails?
Sure, yeah.
Sonic, help!
Like,
I can't do anything anymore.
like, it's not that Tpot's, you know, particularly powerful, but I think the fact that he's, like, technically invincible, just gets, you know, really tired, I think would allow him to defeat, Force's Tails.
So he's kind of like the fucking Highlander. He just can't die. Nice.
Basically, yeah.
So, what can you tell us about the game that no one else knows about yet? Give us some secret.
No one else knows about yet.
Toss us a spoonful of beans.
Trying to think. I guess one thing that I think only the people who have tested the game really know about, but a lot of the text in the game, including the tagline, Show No Fear, are actually taken from the lyrics to the Never-Ending Story. Because actually I used the lyrics to that song for testing the text and menu engine, and it just kind of stuck. Even the how the game says "reach the stars" when you start the game, that's just because I never changed it from the Never-Ending Story lyrics, because I felt like it fit. And a lot of the T in the game, there's a lot of references. A lot of it are really subtle, maybe too subtle. Like, I think it's Cosmic T. Its price is exactly the same length as Space Oddity by David Bowie or something like that. Something I don't think most people would catch on to. It's a lot of small stuff like that.
Nice. Go on.
I'm trying to think. I think that's it, because I would say I would talk about like the palette engine, but I believe I talked about that quite in depth in public before. That's not really much of a secret.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before I pass it out to Static and he starts asking the audience questions?
You
know? Alright, so Static?
Yeah, nothing else.
Static, you're up. Ask some questions from the audience, man.
Hey, I'm Static, here to deliver some of the audience questions. We've got a couple here, prepped up here. So, Rummy asks, so how did the main character in your game, which is named Teabat, come into conception? And how did you come up with the gameplay flow during development? What sparked it?
As for the character, I actually didn't design it. It was designed by Lang and Pix and Pixels, and was inspired by the fact that I was always awake late. So, you know, nocturnal bat. So that question would actually be better for them. Because I wasn't really involved in the design of the character. As for the second question was like the gameplay of the game, right?
Right. How did you come up with the gameplay flow itself during the development?
Some of it was, a lot of it was just kind of experimenting and trial and error. I mean, besides, you know, what I explained earlier, that like I wanted to see kind of a 2D collectathon, and you know, wanted to see a game that, you know, use these kind of seamless transitions like this, and a game that isn't a Metroidvania, at least. And yeah, besides that, it was mainly just I kept kind of testing over and over again with, you know, different things, and tried to find something that just kind of felt right. And there was also a few other things. Like when I first started development, I essentially had a rule where everything had to be mapped to 2 buttons. You know, because I wanted to feel like something that could have been made around the same time as, you know, like the Game Boy or NES or something. And so I wanted to make sure that, you know, even control-wise, you know, it felt kind of as simple as something like Mario, you know, or Sonic or whatever. And so I still have the rule, actually. Everything has to be mapped to 2 buttons. And the game has to be able to be played from beginning to end with just one.
Very nice. So it's more like you're adopting the philosophy of less is more for your game.
Yeah, because I've also I've been watching a lot of like documentaries and how do you call it? I don't want to say retrospectives, but like just kind of detailing the development of, you know, games at that time. You know, and developers like Iwata and Satoshi Tajiri, Miyamoto, and such, and just kind of trying to understand how games were made then, and trying to think of it more from the ground up instead of taking like direct inspiration from you know, various games, because I see that a lot with indie games where they might really like a mechanic from a certain game and kind of build a game based on an existing mechanic from another game. And so I kind of wanted to just, you know, go from my own ideas and kind of what feels right. Just because I feel like I don't see that enough, I suppose. I'd like to see more of it.
Very nice. Okay, so Saturn's Rings asks, what inspired you to use GameMaker as your base form of development for most of your projects? Was it just the simplicity of it?
Mainly familiarity. But also, there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to do that would have been more difficult to do in Unity, because Unity is more, you know, 3D focused, and the 2D is mostly like vector based. It kind of assumes that everything is, you know, floating point values and vector animation, and so getting kind of pixel accurate effects, and especially because if you've probably seen with one of the background effects in Castle Grey, I want to do a lot of like pseudo 3D effects. Yeah, stuff like the boss background, and I felt like GameMaker was the easiest way to kind of quickly, you know, do that sort of stuff without creating a debugging nightmare. And I'm also not too familiar with Click Team products, and I'm not a huge fan of drag and drop.
That's fair. How long have you been using GameMaker?
Oh, geez. 11 years? 10?
Oh, wow.
It was the first like tool I ever used for, you know, making anything really, and I've been I don't use it nearly as much now because I much prefer just using like, you know, raw C#, or, you know, using different kind of APIs, but there aren't very many like complete engines with just using C# for 2D, and so GameMaker was kind of just the closest fit for that. I still use GameMaker mostly just for prototyping things, just because it's a lot quicker than, you know, trying to set something up in SDL or Monogame or something like that. And GameMaker just kind of felt like the right fit for a project like this.
pretty neat. All right, so going down the list here. So Rummy asks here, what's the story behind the shopkeeper's opening sample line with the welcome voice? I've been kind of curious.
I actually have no idea. Lang surprised me with that one. Because originally there was no intro for the shopkeeper at all. But when Lang did the music for it, it started with that, that really cool welcome. And so I ended up animating that intro to kind of go along with it because I really, really love that sample. But I have no idea where it came from or if Lang recorded it, or I have no idea, and I never really asked. But everything, the animation intro and stuff like that came from the music itself. So you'd have to ask Lang that question, actually.
I think it fits really well with the shopkeeper, personally.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. Lang really surprised me with that one. It's really, really cool.
Okay, so now Akuma Yin asks, so he heard Castle Grace theme and he couldn't resist asking, what's your personal favorite of some of the songs that Lang composed?
Oh, geez. It might be between the shopkeeper and the second Castle Grey theme, which in the Sage demo, the second one played in the underground map, and in this one you hear it during the last map and during the credit sequence. I think, yes. It's hard to pick a favorite though. They're all very good.
Oh, Castle Grey is easily one of my favorites.
Oh, it's fantastic. Absolutely.
Okay, so Gilbert asks, will you port the game to consoles?
I plan on it. But I can't necessarily make any promises, because Game Maker Studio 1 is abandonware now. And unfortunately doesn't I don't think you can use it to export to consoles anymore. I know you can't use it for Android anymore, at least if you're uploading to the Play Store. And I tried Game Maker Studio 2 recently. I was going to port that over, but I really, really didn't like it. The interface was actually making me feel nauseous, so I really couldn't work in it. And so I would have to port the game to one of my own engines in C# for console ports or proper Android release. But also kind of the upfront costs for that. If the game does well, basically. But I still can't promise. The plan is at least for Windows, Mac, Linux, and Android, at the very least.
Ah, gotcha. All right, so now Unlimited Trace asks, they're curious about some of the programming for some of the various effects in Tpot itself, because there's some really impressive effects within the game itself. Like if they saw earlier, like Neo was playing, there's the Waterfall Effect. There's just a lot of cool effects. Are you able to share some of the secrets behind that?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to. See, a lot of them are actually fairly simple. For example, the waterfall effect is mainly just a palette cycle. It's because the game uses every single sprite or tile is limited to 4 shades, and by engine limitation, actually. I wrote a shader that will map every single color to one of the 4 colors on a palette. So, but actually, it's interesting that way because the game doesn't actually render any of the sprites or tiles directly. Instead, it actually uses each of the sprites and tiles as a reference for what color to draw from the palette lines. So everything is technically rendering from a texture that has all the palettes on it. And it uses each of the sprites and tiles to determine the intensity of the light, to know what color to use.
Right.
And so some of the effects also use that, like the lighting system essentially just pushes the resulting color to either the lightest shade or darkest shade on that palette line. And so then for the waterfalls and the fountains and stuff like that, it's the same thing, where it's just kind of a repeating pattern of those 4 colors, and then it cycles through them. The fountain is a little bit more complicated because there's also actually multiple layers of palette cycling, and each with their own palettes. So it gives kind of this sense of depth. But then also, you might notice there's like a subtle or kind of a slight reflection on it. And that's basically just re-rendering Tbat's current sprite on the fountain using a certain blend mode that will make it only draw on the actual waterfall itself instead of what's behind it. And so it's actually, the code for it is actually very, very simple, but I think it works really well. There's also a very slight like pseudo 3D distortion to it, where it scales down the reflection horizontally as it approaches the edges. I say it's pseudo 3D, but it's so slight that it's almost hard to tell it's even there. So I make it sound more impressive than it looks.
It's really hard to notice.
Yeah, and I also made it so that like the fountain doesn't use the lightest color in its palette, so that when the lightning strikes, you can see it almost looks like it's kind of glowing through the fountain. So I'm really proud of that effect too. And then as for one of my favorite effects is the sewer parallax at the end of Castle Grey,
yes,
where it's like this like morphing pseudo 3D, and that was just essentially line parallax. So it's one kind of small background, and it renders it row by row, like each pixel row, and it just kind of scales them down horizontally as it gets closer to the center. Something's farther away, it's smaller. And it just shifts them based on its relative position to the camera. And the same for the vertical one, except, columns instead of rows. So again, it's a very simple effect where it's just kind of moving lines of pixels around. But I think it looks really cool. I'm very happy with that one. And again, because of the way that the palette system works, the colors in the background of that background they're both dark enough. The two darkest colors are both dark enough that they'll map to black. But then when the lightning strikes, that's enough to bump one of the colors up, and so it kind of looks like it's like lighting up the sewer, or it kind of reveals like a pattern that wasn't there before.
That's super cool. Yeah, because I remember I ran across it and I was just kind of blown away, because it kind of looks simple, but wow, it just even then when you like encounter it for the first time, it's still really impressive.
Thank you. I'm really proud of that one, and it's funny because like this is the only place it's going to be used. It's going to be used in the next map for demo 2, but like. It was like a week of work just for kind of this little moment here. I think it was so worth it though. I'm trying to think, one other effect. The snow. Another one where the snow is... It's basically just 4 textures. 4 layers of snow. Each for like the... 1 for the foreground and 3 for each of the kind of background layers. And the biggest difference is that the ones that are farther back are scaled ever so slightly horizontally, so that single pixels are actually a fraction of a pixel. So that when it's kind of moving, or when the snow is kind of moving down, because it's a fraction of a pixel, it causes them to kind of snap in and out of place. Mm-hmm. Which, for the far away ones, it just ends up looking kind of like a shimmer, almost like a rotating snowflake, reflecting the light. And then it just kind of moves these based on, like it scrolls them vertically and then moves them based on, where the camera is. So it's also, again, a very, very simple effect, but I think it works really well there too.
It's really neat. I enjoy that detail.
Thank you.
All right, so moving down the list here, now Drawbits here has a question. What were the specific inspirations for some of the stages in the game? Did your process just consist of colors and general ideas first? Did you use any particular brainstorming methods?
Well, I started with Castle Gray because, like, the mock-up that I made originally that I was talking about was, kind of a castle level, and everything was kind of built off of that mock-up. Excuse me. And so the whole game and story was kind of built off of that. Oh yeah, the fountain has that thing where if you jump under the water streams, it kind of sprays over Tpot's head, which I'm really happy with that detail too. But anyway, oh shoot, where was I? Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So Drawbits asks, gotta scroll up a bit. The specific inspiration. So, did your process just consist of colors and the general ideas first? Any brainstorming methods?
Yes, I started with Castle Gray, and everything was kind of built from there. Like the first two stages, for example, were actually because during like very early development, I had family or just people I know who didn't really play video games or weren't familiar with them or weren't very good at them, test the game to make sure that it was still accessible. Because a lot of early arcade games, NES games, were very pick up and play, even for people who hadn't played video games. And there weren't very many people who had, since it was very recent or very new at the time. And so I really wanted to make sure that people who pretty much anybody can pick up and play Teabat. And I found that dropping the player right into Castle Gray was a bit confusing. And so I wanted to add two areas that kind of act like a tutorial, that kind of lead the player into Castle Gray and kind of make sure that they understand the game, they understand the controls and double jump and stuff like that. By the time they get to that point, in a way that's still fun. It doesn't feel like a tutorial. It feels like a natural part of the game. And then the rest of it is still kind of centered around the castle. You kind of end up going like under the castle. With some cave-like levels, and then you're kind of climbing up the tower, and then eventually reaching the final boss. And so most of the levels past that point are were just kind of based on the story, but altered a little bit to try to make sure that it'll be interesting from beginning to end, because I don't want it to just be after you get to the castle the rest of the game is just castle, because there's still 6 more areas after that.
Right.
And only two of them are still in the castle.
All right, cool. So now Cosmic Eternity asks, wants to ask Tpot about your inspirations for some of the palette choices that are included in the game outside of the song-based palettes.
As for like inspirations?
Yes.
Okay. I don't. Let's see. Besides like song-based ones, there's the Snow and Heat palettes that are directly based on Snow and Heat Miser, and their description is actually a quote from their song too, which is from a Rankin Bass special called the Year Without Santa Claus, I believe. As for a lot of the other ones, they were mainly just the original ones, at least, were mainly just kind of for variety, I suppose. Just what colors I felt would look nice and stand out from some of the other palettes. But then there's also cases like the Floppy and Memory Tea, which are literally just IBM CGA palettes. There's 3 or 4 that are based on original Game Boy palettes or Game Boy Color. Hot Dog is literally the hot dog stand theme from Windows 3.1. there's the Virtual Boy palette. There's the Tiger Gamecom palette, and then there's Terminal palette was actually loosely inspired by the movie War Games, even though it's green instead of blue.
Very nice.
I just really liked that kind of terminal aesthetic. And there's one more. Oh yeah, and some of them were just kind of, when I was trying to figure out more ideas for palette names, some of them are like seasonal, or got the summer palette, the winter palette, autumn palette, stuff like that. And times a day, I wanted to have like a kind of a whole set of themes for some of them. Oh, and there's the Amber palette, which is based on those old amber phosphor amber phosphor CRT displays, like the really old ones that look really cool.
Nice. I like that mix of like those retro colors and sort of modern colors.
Yeah, like I wanted all of the a lot of the palettes to kind of feel like not necessarily related to 80s video games, but just kind of the aesthetic of that time period, I suppose. Whether it be software, movies, music, whatever, everything was kind of just inspired by, that time period, or what people would be listening to or are thinking about during that time period.
Right. Very, very nice. All right. So now Barack here asks the question. I assume the game uses its own custom hardware limitations. If so, what exactly are they?
Yes, they are kind of loosely based on Super Game Boy. I should say inspired, because they are. Every sprite and tile is 16 by 16 pixels. It can only use 4 colors, and from a palette of 32,000. I forget the number. I believe that's 15-bit color. Whatever the Game Boy Color, 32,768. There we go. Which is a bit different from the Game Boy and like most consoles that use 4 shades, because they usually use 3 colors plus transparency. But here, I'm cheating a little bit with 4 colors plus transparency, just because I found 3 to be a little bit too limiting. There's a lot more that I could do with 4 colors.
Right.
And there's one other thing. Oh yeah, and every single color has to kind of map to that linear scale of light or brightest color, then or like white, then light gray, dark gray, black. And so all the palettes have that kind of linear bright color to dark color. And so I can't have a sprite or tile that has, multiple different colors. You might see the shopkeeper here is kind of a linear, orange and red. Everything's kind of monotone color that way. The game was also kind of loosely inspired by how Game Boy games would add color. You'll see that a lot in, I think, the Pokemon games when played with the Game Boy Color. Everything would still kind of be white to black, just with a little bit of color added in between.
And was it inspired specifically by the Game Boy Color palettes?
Not the palettes themselves, more so just how that system worked. I just found it really interesting how they were able to add so much color to the Game Boy without really without doing a whole lot. Like, it's a very simple and kind of genius method of adding a lot of color to it, because it's exactly how the Super Game Boy works. Is it just replaces the gray palettes with color ones that map to the same colors, essentially. You still got your darkest color, light gray, dark gray, light gray, white, whatever. And it gives it a bit of a unique style and aesthetic where everything kind of has that monotone colored look. I haven't seen enough of that. Again, something I just always want to see more of.
Right. That's very neat. All right then. So our last question from the audience comes from Mike L. He asks, "Does your game take influence from either classic or modern games, or are you going for a mix of both?"
I want to say more classic. There is definitely some modern influence. The way Teabat loses 10T when he dies, and then kind of respawns right where he was. That's a little obviously inspired by Odyssey. There wasn't. I can't think of any games, for the NES or Game Boy that didn't have a live system. Actually, Wario Land might not have. I haven't played that, but I'm pretty sure that was one of the few games to do that. Yeah, mostly classic games, but less any classic games specifically, and more so like trying to make a game that feels like it would fit alongside games from that era. So more so influenced by the development of them, I suppose. I don't know how you describe that.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I think that wraps it up for the audience questions. Thank you very much for the questions. And I will return this now to PCO.
All right.
Well, I don't got a whole lot much else to add, to be honest. That was some fucking lit shit, especially with all those great audience questions. Unless anyone's got anything else to add, I would say, Tpot, is there anything else you would like to talk about related to Teabat or otherwise before we close out this little interview session of ours?
I'm trying to think. I really went kind of in depth with everything that this demo has to offer. And Neo played a little bit of bird mode. So, I think that's everything.
So, the one question I have is, when do you think, not as a hardline announcement of a release date, but what do you project as an ETA for the actual release of this game when we can actually buy it? Like, do we get like a quarter 3 through 4 of 2020 or like some estimate like that? Like, ooh, what do you think?
Yeah, quarter 3 next year is kind of the the target.
All right.
So either quarter 3 or quarter 4. Excuse me again. Sorry. Next year.
So we got about a year. Nice. Oh, actually, I do have one last question for you, just to close out.
All right.
Coffee, in your opinion, is it a form of tea?
Oh, that's a really interesting question.
Well, you got plant matter that's been crushed up and chopped up and then brewed with hot water.
Yeah, but doesn't tea have to be leaves? Isn't that kind of what defines it?
No,
because
they use like fruit seeds and shit in tea now. They got like all those herbal teas where they got the pomegranate teas and all that kind of stuff.
And that's still considered tea?
Yeah. In fact,
I mean,
in this case, coffee would be considered an herbal tea.
Interesting. I actually didn't know that.
Perhaps.
Maybe it's hard because it's still a very a different drink than a lot of teas. But I think there's also a lot of different teas that I haven't tried.
There's some weird teas out there.
I don't think I don't think I know enough about tea, with the development of making tea. I guess the process of making tea to really make a proper answer to that. I have no idea. But I do prefer coffee over most teas. I do love tea, but I still don't end up drinking it nearly as often as water and coffee.
All right. Sounds fucking lit. So I think that that'd be a funny question to close out on. All right, so I think it's about it. Like, unless anyone else anything, I think that's the close of our little interview here.
Yeah, I'm absolutely excited to see what's to come of Teabat. Since the Sage demo, this game has shown nothing but promise, and I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing what you've got to bring to the table in the future with this.
It's
Thank
fucking
you.
incredible. Are you kidding? Teabat's off the fucking chain. It's the shit.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that.
I mean, dude, fucking truth is truth. I don't know what else to tell you. It's some fucking badass shit.
Go out and support Teabat. Buy with money. Do it.
Yeah, buy Teabat with money.
And,
Quarter 3, quarter 4 next year, maybe.
download the demo after this interview because it'll be out free immediately after this interview is done.
By the way, so you got that new demo. You put it on SFGHQ or?
Yes.
All right,
I was
so
originally planning on releasing it privately, but I think it's good for a public release.
All right, so I'll just link that in announcements in a minute here once that goes up, and
Yeah, I haven't uploaded it yet, so it'll be immediately after the stream, I think.
All right, well, I think that's that. Thanks everyone for joining us. We all had a great time. Interesting stuff was learned. Buy Teabat with money.
Yes, support. Do it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us and talking to us about this awesome project you got going.
Thank you.
All right, well, I guess that kind of closes it up. Thanks everyone for watching or listening. Y'all have a good one.